Hi. So, in this next video, this is our video on being an entrepreneur, learning how to become an entrepreneur, learning about startups. Um, and this one is, we just did the introduction. This next one is the entrepreneurial mindset, how to think like an entrepreneur. So let's get going here. I'm going to add this. Um, what we're going to talk about here are the mindset, the habits, and the one game that changes everything. So let's keep going here. And the first thing about being an entrepreneur, right, is you have to be curious, and you have to be mindful, and you have to be observant. You have to be looking and noticing everything that goes on in your life. What's going on in your day. Anything that's annoying, slow, broken, where there's a friction, or you hear people talking about something that those things annoys them, or causes a friction, some pain in the neck that people would like to have solved, and start and ask, what would happen if somebody fixed that, and take notes. What I use for notes is I just use my phone, and I just use the notes app in there, and I just take notes on that, and then that integrates with my computer and tablet and everything. So everything that I think of, I put in there, and then go through, and I think of my notes like a cognitive net. It's so I don't forget anything. It's amazing how many times I've thought, oh, I'll remember that, and 2 days later I've forgotten, and I don't even know how many things I've forgotten that I forgot about. I don't even remember that I forgot about them, because a lot of times I will, go back on a note and say, "Oh man, I forgot all about that." And that's really a great idea. So you have to keep track of your ideas. Don't think that you can rely on your memory, because, from my experience, it just doesn't work. Entrepreneurs write them down. Really, people notice problems and just move on. Right? I put there, but that's the difference. Not talent, not money. It's writing them down and following through on that kind of stuff. It's really, really key. Um, so let's see, what's the next thing here? So the entrepreneurial mindset, right? Carol Dweck, a very famous book, and she wrote about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And as entrepreneurs, we want to have what? We want to have a growth mindset. We want to think that we can get better at things, that through our learning and our curiosity, that we can develop habits and skills and just get better by removing bad habits. We can have free up time to let good habits start to evolve. A fixed mindset, abilities are set. Everybody thinks that's it. Either you're smart or not. Oh, I'm not good at math, or oh, I'm not musically inclined. All those kind of things. It's not true. You can learn anything you put your mind to. You really, really can. And failure proves your limitations, like, oh, I always fail, stuff like that. You avoid challenges to protect your ego, because you don't want to fail. You don't want to look like an idiot. You really have to be able to go out and look like an idiot. Even in Zen, they call it beginner's mind. That's a beautiful state of affairs. A place to be is beginner's mind, where you don't know everything and you're learning as you go along. And fixed mindset, you give up when things get hard. That's not us, right? We're not going to do it. And, on the growth mindset side, basically, abilities developed through effort and learning. And that's really true. Reading is a superpower. The more you read, the more things you get to know. And you need to read hundreds of books over a span of decades, but you really need to be reading constantly. That's how we expand our knowledge and learn from the valuable things that other people have written down. It's such a distilled way to gain access to other brilliant minds. Um, and failure equals information. It's not part of your identity. It's like, I always use that phrase that Edison said, that he didn't fail 10,000 times on making a light bulb. He found 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb, and then he invented the light bulb. You got to go through those mistakes, those failures, in order to know what doesn't work, so you can figure out what does work. You take on hard problems, you recover fast, you treat mistakes as data. Mistakes and failure, pretty much the same thing, right? And so that's the only mindset that really works in a startup, is a growth mindset. So let's go on to the next slide here, and that is this concept of ex nihilo. I love that phrase. It's a Latin phrase, it's a philosophical phrase, something from nothing. And that's really what we're doing. We come up with an idea. Everything's invented twice, right? It's invented first in our mind, it's a product of mind, and then we have to translate that into the real world in some sort of, tangible, concrete product or service that we're gonna work with. It's there's nothing, there's some, it's just and even before there's an idea in your head, and then ideas pop in your head, and that's why you want to look for things that are problems, because then you can see, oh, that's something, can I solve it? What would that look like? So then there's something, rough there and all, and then you build it over an iterative process of trying things and going back to the drawing board and doing it. You polish that up and you make something great. I mean, it's really, really, what could be more satisfying than that, right? I mean, it's just an amazing, amazing feeling. So, what is a startup? We're entrepreneurs. We're making startup companies, and a startup company is different than a small business. A startup is basically just a you know an enterprise in search of a business model that actually works. You're looking for product market fit, something that really resonates with a group of customers, and it's a searching process, and you're testing, you're guessing about what you're making. It's like the scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis. You guess what people are going to want, and you think your product's going to solve that need, and then you test it, and you're testing your hypothesis. You get that's an experiment, right? And think of it that way. Like, scientists don't get bummed out when their experiment doesn't work. Well, sometimes they do if it took a long time, it costs a lot of money, but you do an experiment, but you're emotionally distanced from it, and you get the results, and then you modify based on what you course correct based on what those results are. So what you're trying to do is, the goal is to find something that works, and then you start to scale the business. You don't worry about logos and marketing campaigns and all that kind of stuff until you have something that resonates with people. Product market fit. So, a small business is different than that. Like a barber shop, you know what it's going to be from day one. You have a proven model. The goal is a stable, profitable operation, and that's what really, makes the difference. We're just working with experiments, trying to find something that works. So here I want to talk about the great idea trap, right? First time entrepreneurs will wait for the perfect idea. Well, we want to just get started on stuff and just even get the practice of going through, how do you turn something from an idea into an MVP, a minimal viable product, and see how that resonates with a customer base. So this pottery story is kind of interesting. A professor split his class into two groups. Group A was graded on one perfect pot at the end of the semester, and Group B was graded on quantity. And here's the key: quantity actually equals quality. If you keep making more pots, they'd get a better grade. And at the end of the year, the best pots all came from Group B because they kept making more, and they got. That's how you learn. You learn by doing. And so that, the perfectionists who were just waiting for that one perfect idea, you're just not gonna. It's not gonna work out that well for you. We want to just be doing stuff and learning from it. So spotting problems, we talked about that, but then the key is spotting problems that are well worth solving. We got to find stuff that people want to solve, have solved. If you have a problem and it's only you that experiences it, well, that's not a very big market, right? But if it's like, wow, many people, a million people, around the world have that same kind of problem, then you're onto something, right? How many people does it affect? And do people really want to solve badly enough to pay? And how much? What's the value? When you start pricing things, how much value are you creating or providing? By reduced expenses or whatever it is, reduced anxiety, time savings, all those kind of things. You can price off of that. That's value pricing. It's the best way to price. And so you have to know how badly do people want to, to pay. How do they want to solve badly enough to pay? And is there a realistic path from you to get to here from there? You'd be like, I'm going to invent these flying shoes, and then people could fly to work and they don't have to worry about traffic and all that. Hey, great idea. But how is there a realistic path to making the flying shoes? Probably not right now, right? So it really has to be something that you can solve. And that's the key, right? So here's another thing, iteration. And that's like I always think of a rock tumbler, right? Where you put in these rough rocks and it's in there with sand and the tumbler goes around, the rocks tumble and they grind against the sand, and little by little they get polished, right? And at the end you have these beautifully polished rocks. That's iteration. You try something, you get the feedback from what that was, and then you try again with a little bit different thing, and you course correct a little bit, and you iterate. That's called an iterative process. Try, observe what happens, you learn from that, you extract a lesson, and then you adjust accordingly, and then you try again, and you learn from that, and you keep on going. And that's how we actually learn, not from having the perfect idea, but from just iterating, just constantly iterating. So here's some key terms to this first session, right? This first chapter, basically, and growth mindset. We talked about that. Ex nihilo, iterate. Growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. What a startup is, and the concept of just notice everything. Really, really key stuff. Very excited about this stuff. I just love it. And so here's a try it exercise for you. Spend some time, doing the notice everything game for real. Walk around wherever it is, your environment, and write down problems and frustrations and the idea, why doesn't somebody fix this? Whether it's a broken parking meter or whatever it is, and aim for at least 10 ideas. Try to find, 10 things, and don't filter, just write them down. Don't judge. And then later on, you can go back and review and see which ones make the most sense. So I'll be back with the next chapter, which is we're going to go dive more into finding problems worth solving. So until then, I'll catch you later.